Well, welcome back to the shop. So I get a lot of questions about woodworkers and collectors and all who want to start looking for vintage hand planes, and they don't know what to look for. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about what you should look for to find a good vintage Bailey patent style hand plane that you can clean up, restore if it needs it, sharpen, and use for woodworking. Now, remember, we're talking specifically about the Bailey patent style hand plane, and that's basically a hand plane that has a base something like this, right? And there's many manufacturers, but the base will look like that. But the patent really is about this. It's these two pieces separate. That was patented to save on manufacturing, to help manufacture. So now all of a sudden we could manufacture this and this separate. They could come off an assembly line or out of a forge or a foundry and put them together later. So it also allowed a number 4 and a number 5 to use the exact same frog. So that's what we're going to look at today. Now I'm going to put up here a couple of examples of a Stanley Bailey hand plane. Now remember, there's a huge and extensive amount of data about the whole Stanley and Bailey problems, lawsuits, and everything that goes along with that in the history books. But we're not going to talk about that today. We're just going to talk about what kind of hand plane you're going to look for to use in your woodworking shop. So why are we only talking about the Bailey style hand planes? Well, I'm doing that because, one, it's easily the most popular style vintage hand plane to be used in woodworking that there is. They were made by the billions. There's different types, different styles, but they all come with that two-piece frog and base like I showed you. Now there's other parts, and I can put a quick picture up here of what those parts look like, but basically they all have those similar parts. They were manufactured by a whole slew of manufacturers. As a matter of fact, I don't believe there's ever been a list that is conclusive of all of the manufacturers that have made Bailey style hand planes since they were made in the beginning. There's a lot of them out there, and they work really well, and you can find them relatively easy if you want to go look for them. There's also a lot of not so great hand planes out there made by the same manufacturers. So in other words, Stanley made some great hand planes, but they made some that were it takes a lot to get them to work correctly. Now you'll get different theories on that, and different guys will say, well, a handyman plane, you can make it work, and they're right, you can. But the point is, if you just want a few hand planes or put a collection of hand planes together that you can use for woodworking, handyman probably isn't your place to start. And there's many other ones. So how do you tell the difference? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. So I've got a crate here in front of me, and this is all a crate of bases, hand plane bases that I've collected over the years. When I say collected, I won't necessarily say that I accidentally pick them up because some of them might have been a few bucks and I just bought them for parts. But if you're looking for one to use, there's some things that you want to look at and pay close attention to. So here's one, right? So there's little cracks in this corner, in the corner of the mouth right there, right? So will that plane work? Maybe, probably. That crack is caused by the frog pushing down on the front base too hard. Somebody tightened the crap out of it, or it fell off the bench and hit the frog in such a way that it drove that mouth down so it cracked. So that's one crack or deficiency that you wanna look for. So another one, and this one can be pretty hard to see when it's kind of rusty and crusty, right? But if you look really close there, you can see this plane has been repaired. Now, I'm not going to tell you, geez, don't ever buy that hand plane. I'm just telling you that there's a possibility that that repair, which you can see happened on both sides of the plane, may have made the bottom not flat. And I know I'm saying a lot of mays, but the point is you don't pay a premium price for this hand plane when you see that. Now, I bought this, I remember where I got this one, and I didn't even realize it was there, but I didn't pay much for it, so I went and I found another base and I put all the parts together and I had a working hand plane. So here's another very common problem, and I hope you can see that crack right there. So you look at the cheeks on the plane, you'll often see cracks in this part of the plane. Again, you know, can you fix it? It can be welded, it can be brazed, blah, blah, blah. But don't pay a lot for that plane because it's probably not going to last forever. And it's going to be hard to resell if you ever decide to resell it. So unless you're buying it for parts, you might want to just leave it for the next guy. Or, you know, if you get it cheap enough, buy it for the parts. And it might last, well, as long as you need it. I mean, I don't know how long you need it. I don't know how much you're going to use it. But just know to look for that. So another area you're going to look at is around the mouth here. So a small chip in the back of the mouth. You notice this one's got another crack right there. But another chip out of the back of the mouth, a small chip in the back of the mouth isn't going to hurt performance. Now, it does hurt the value of the plane, but it will not hurt the performance as long as it's a small chip. Now, something like this one, yeah, you don't want that one. There's no support there for the blade whatsoever, or the frog or anything else. Now, this one, the frog doesn't sit on that, but you don't want that one. And if it's a chip in the front, remember how a hand plane works, right? So the whole idea of we can move the frog, which is another whole video I should do, but if you believe that you need a small mouth and you can move that frog forward so you get a narrow mouth, that chip that's in the front is going to affect that. Now, if it's a really, really small chip, I guess you can kind of file it out, but really understand that a chip in the front of the mouth isn't a good thing. And it will affect the value of your plane, and it can affect the way that the plane works. So be cognizant of that and look for that. If you're just looking for hand planes to use, you want to be really careful and really inspect them. there's always chips like this, right? So this isn't necessarily going to affect the performance, but it is going to affect the value. So, be careful and don't pay, top retail if it's got chips like that. And I got other ones in here. If I can quickly find one. See, there, that's gone, and you see a lot of them. You'll find some that they're broke here, and you'll want to look. You don't want one where these holes, these threaded, where the threaded bolts go, they wind up through the bottom. Now that can happen a couple of different ways. One is somebody can fix it. This could get stripped out and someone tried to re-drill it and drilled too far. And the other possibility is they tried to flatten and flattened too much. But whatever way, again, if that bolt hole, any one of them, goes all the way through to the bottom, that's a red flag. You probably don't want to buy that hand plane, or at least you don't want to pay top price for it. So another area to look for is the frog. So you'll see a lot of hand planes with the yoke broke. Again, the yoke can be replaced. That's this piece right here, right? That can be replaced, but you have to find one. You have to replace it, and you always risk breaking the frog when you replace that. So again, know that needs to be there. The other thing is the lateral. You notice the lateral adjuster is missing on this. Now, remember some planes, the older ones, the pre-lateral planes came without a lateral. So do you need it? No. You can use a plane without that lateral, but do you want to buy one without it? That's up to you, but if you want the lateral, make sure it's there when you purchase that plane. Otherwise, you're going to have to replace it. And you'll hear a lot of talk about the pressed steel frogs, most of them made by Pexo. The pressed steel frog hand planes simply are not quality hand planes. Now, we can get into a discussion about, can someone really experienced make one work? Maybe. But it's not something that you want for your primary hand plane. And it's not something that you want to take home as your first restoration with the anticipation of using it. Well, if you want to pick one up because it's only a couple bucks at a flea market and you figure it'll be good practice, that's great. That works wonderful. Almost all of us who have done this for a while has picked one up and played with it just to see what it looks like, what it works like, and if we can make it work. And if you want it for a scrub plane, maybe it'll be okay. But don't pick it up as your primary smoother. You're just not going to be happy about it. I hear of castings that were not quality. Look for that and try to avoid any of those hand planes where the casting is really poor quality. They're probably a later made plane to start with, but you're probably just not going to be happy with the quality of work you get out of that hand plane. So what else do you want to look for? Well, look at the lateral adjustment on the hand plane. So the lateral adjuster can tell you a lot about the manufacturer of the hand plane. There are some, like the Stanley Defiance, that has a distinctive lateral. Now the Stanley Defiance isn't a bad plane, and they can be made to work. They're just not top of the line. You can take them home and you can get them to work. And again, depending on what you're going to use that plane for, if it's going to be your primary smoother, it's up to you, right? And it's not a bad thing to take a Defiance home and see if you can get it to work the way you want it to work. But just note that it's not the top of the line Stanley Bailey style hand plane. And check out the lever cap. The lever cap can also give you an indication of what the quality of the plane is going to be. Number one, the casting. Number two, look at the style and the material that it's made out of. So I'll show you a couple here that you want to avoid. And if you see one, and once you've picked up a regular Stanley Bailey or a Sargent BBM or even a Miller's Falls, you're going to know what a quality lever cap looks like. But if it looks like it's pressed steel or the casting is really bad, and even the spring on the back, and I'll show you what the spring on the back looks like, but just because it doesn't have the spring on the back doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to work. It just means that it's not the highest quality hand plane you can buy, and unless you're getting it extremely cheap, then your money is probably better spent elsewhere. So let's talk about the blade or the iron on a Stanley Bailey type hand plane. Now you notice this one's actually been reworked. So let's take a look at this one. So some manufacturers put this circled hole at the bottom and some put it at the top. It's actually a patent. You can look that up. It doesn't matter in use where that is. But you want to look at your iron or your blade and make sure it's restorable. These need to fit together. They need to work together, and you need to be able to sharpen that. If it's pitted, especially down at the bottom, it's going to be harder to sharpen. It's going to be harder to keep sharp. Now the thickness of the blade, you'll hear guys talk about the thickness, and the thickness does matter, but in most of your premium planes, they're about an average thick. Now Ohio Tools, Union, they all made some that were a little thicker, and they work nice. Some guys like them better, but does it matter? I don't think so. What really matters is, can I get it sharp without extensive work? Can I get it cleaned up? Is it pitted too bad to work? Is it pitted too bad to get cleaned up? That's something that you have to look at. And sometimes it's hard because sometimes you can't get it apart when you're out in the, if it's on eBay or if you're out in a flea market. So you want to keep that into consideration on whatever you're buying and how much you're going to pay for it. If it's in really good shape, let's face it, if it's in really good shape, you can take it apart. But if it's all rusted together, it's kind of hit and miss. Now, personally, I don't mind cleaning them up. I don't mind trying to get the rust out of them. If they're pitted, well, you can use the ruler trick to get by. I don't particularly like that, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do. So look at the iron, look at the blade, whatever, and see what kind of condition it's in, and make sure that becomes part of your decision of whether you want to buy that hand plane and whether it's a quality hand plane or not. There is a difference, and it will matter of how often you have to sharpen it. Obviously, you can't have any way to know the hardness or whether or not it's been lost its temper. That's a chance you take buying a vintage plane. But you can tell if it's been if it's rusted and pitted too bad to be cleaned up and used. Sometimes you find that they're pitted right down at the end and you just need to grind them back. But that's work that you need to do. So, you got to decide, is it worth the asking price with all of that work that I have to do? If it's a $10, $15, even $20 hand plane that you're going to take home and use for, the rest of your career, okay. But look at it and know what you're getting when you buy it. So another hint that you can use to try and decide if your hand plane is a quality hand plane is the knob and tote. So if your knob and tote is a rosewood handle, that's what this one is, and notice this one's been repaired, the horn's been replaced, but it's not a bad thing necessarily as long as it looks like it's been done well. Although one without a repair obviously might be a little better, although you can also find ones that need repair, and as long as the price is appropriate, that's not a bad thing. And the other one is mahogany. So of these two, rosewood or mahogany, you want to look for those. Now, obviously, the type of wood that goes on a hand plane, on the knob and tote, doesn't make the performance better. But the point is, manufacturers didn't spend the extra money to put a more expensive piece of hardwood on the hand plane if it wasn't a higher quality plane. You'll find that the lower quality planes are some type of hardwood, and usually painted or a dark stain. And again, it doesn't necessarily affect the performance of the plane, but it's just one more hint, or one more piece of evidence that you can use when you're first starting out of, am I buying a high quality plane or am I buying a second line? So use that, and again, just use it as another tip in finding a high quality user hand plane. And now I should mention a few hand plane models that kind of defy what I've been telling you. So there's a few models of hand planes out there that might to the novice look like something that they ought to avoid. It's something that if you can get at a reasonable price, and whether or not you want to collect them or actually use them, you might want to think about picking them up. So the first one I want to talk about that falls in that category is the Miller's Falls Buck Rogers. The Miller's Falls Buck Rogers has a plastic looking handle and knob, but they're extremely collectible and they make really good users. So if you find one, don't pass it by, you want to pick it up. And another one also made by Miller's Falls is the Miller's Falls that carries the permaloid handle. They're kind of a clear plastic handle and knob, and again, they are extremely collectible, and the rest of the plane is pretty much just like the Miller's Falls planes, so they would make a good user, although I don't know that I'd want to risk dropping them off the bench if I was using it. Not to say that I wouldn't use it, but that's up to you. If you can find one, pick it up, bring it home, look at it, test it out, and then decide what you want to do with it. So that should conclude this video for now. A couple of other notes that I want to make to you, though, is just because it's not a Stanley Bailey patented plane doesn't mean that it's not worth bringing home. This video was meant to help you find that Stanley Bailey, or Sargent VBM, or Miller's Falls, or Union, or Ohio Tools, and there's so many, many, many more out there that work just wonderfully once they're cleaned up and sharpened. So don't pass it by just because it doesn't say Stanley on it, and don't pass it by just because it isn't the Bailey patented plane like we talked about today. When I started doing this 20, 25 years ago, I picked up anything that I found that was cheap enough. And yeah, I brought home some duds, and yeah, I brought some home that I shouldn't have, but that's how I learned what everything was. I brought it home, cleaned it up, figured out what I had, and went from there. It was a lot of fun, and I found some really good stuff that I didn't know what I had till I got it home and started researching it. Most of what I find now, I know what it is. I don't buy the really inexpensive, cheaply made planes anymore. And I definitely buy something if I don't know what it is today, because it's probably pretty unique or pretty rare. And if you do this long enough, you'll get to that point as well. All I can say is go out there, dig it down into the dirt, find the stuff, rusty, crusty, it'll clean up, bring it home, and have some fun with it. I hope you liked this video. I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, like the video, and leave some comments. Let me know what I might have forgot. Let me know what you find. Let me know what you found. And just let me know what your thoughts are about the hand planes and the hand plane collecting and using in general.